You're listening to a special bonus episode of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset. My name is April Seifert, and I'm your host.
And I'm Ashley Smith.
And we are the co-founders of Peak Mind, the Center for Psychological Strength. Now, we're coming to you with this special bonus episode, and I'm pretty sure you can probably guess why. As you know, there is a lot of uncertainty and volatility happening right now with the coronavirus and the uncertainty around that and the ripple effect that it's having on many people's lives and businesses and routine and etc. Really, we can't stress and overstate how much this is impacting a lot of facets of people's lives. And because of that, we wanted to hop on and talk about what some actionable and really just things that you can do in your day-to-day life right now to help cope with what is going on. And Ashley, I know this is something that you're hearing about from folks in your practice and other folks who are reaching out, right?
Absolutely. So my day job is I've specialized in the treatment of anxiety disorders for more than a decade. So I'm hearing from people who struggle with anxiety, people who don't typically, but are experiencing a lot of anxiety now during this time, and then even chats and conversations amongst my colleagues in the anxiety world. So it's a hot topic, and I think it's really important to keep in mind some things as we're all trying to navigate this in a way that keeps us safe, keeps our loved ones safe, keeps our community safe, but doesn't necessarily give into panic and fear. And I think it's prompted a lot of really important conversations. And I think that's part of what we want to cover a little bit too, not necessarily in giving specific concrete steps of this is exactly what you need to do to get through this situation, because you and I are navigating uncertainty like everybody else. But I think what we can offer is information and tools from psychology to really help people make the decisions that are right for them and their families, and to maintain a quality of life and continue to flourish even during this time that's going on.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the first thing that people should take away from something that you just said is that you're hearing from a lot of people, which means if you're feeling nervous or anxious, or put whatever word on it you want to because of how uncertain things are, if you're worrying about your family for whatever, individual reasons it might be, having a little bit of self-compassion about the fact that that's just very natural because everyone is feeling that to some degree. I think that's, one of the first things that we should probably call out, that, everybody's feeling this uncertainty, and it isn't just, that you're, weak or deficient or, not handling it well. It's just uncertainty is really difficult for everyone.
Absolutely. And I would extend that to say, that it's really important at this time for us to be relying on our compassion skills when it comes to other people too, because other people are going to have different responses to the uncertainty. And I'm seeing a wide range. On one end of the extreme is the whatever, this is blown completely out of proportion, it's all media hype and people are stupid, to the other extreme, which is this is the end of days and we're all like the world is going to fall into chaos. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle there, but I think compassion for ourselves and others is critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to do this episode because you have some really great thoughts about, I'm just going to say it's going to be about 4-ish actionable tips, because I'm pretty sure we're going to flesh a few things out as we chat here. But let's start with the basics. What's the number one first thing that you want people to keep in mind as we're navigating this time that we're in right now?
Well, the first one, you and I, if anybody is familiar with either one of our works, we talk all the time about the biases that inherently exist in our mind. And I think this is a really important time to be aware of those. And we won't go into all of the ones that are at play right now, but it's important to know that there are a couple of things that happen just in the way our minds work that are really relevant during this time. And a couple of those are things like we tend to focus on the things that we hear all the time. And our minds tend to fill in the gaps. And we're not always aware of what we don't know. So when I put these two together, it kind of brings me to, I think, 1 and 2. So the action step 1 that I would tell people is to really, really be mindful of the fictions that your mind is creating. So I teach people when I work with them one-on-one, and honestly to anybody who will listen, that there's a difference between facts, the things that we know for sure right now through our direct sensory experience. And even that is open to a little bit of debate because it's our perception is influenced. But still, if we take facts, the things that we know to be true for sure right now, that's different than the fictions or the stories that our minds tell us. And I'm not saying that they're always false or inaccurate. A lot of times they are. But our minds are designed to connect dots and fill in the gaps, to make sense out of things and to look for patterns. So our minds will predict and interpret and make assumptions and add meanings and judgments. And they do all of this naturally and often without even our awareness. Now, here's the kind of twisted part is there's a part of our brain that is capable of what we call mental representation. So it's imagining, right? So we can imagine things and we can perceive things that are actually happening right here, right now to us or in front of us. But the emotional part of our brain cannot tell the difference between real and imagined. So the implications here are that we experience the same anxiety and stress and fear from these imagined worst case scenarios, from these predictions that we are making or that other people are making for us and sharing with us. But our emotions are responding in the same way. That means our fear systems get activated. That means that we are experiencing the response that we would normally have to threat and to danger. And that's important to know because, in the anxiety world, we have this saying like feelings aren't facts. So just because you feel like there is danger, you feel like there is threat, doesn't mean that there actually is. And please hear me out because I'm not discounting this. I'm not on the edge. I'm not on that extreme that's saying the COVID-19 pandemic is nothing. Not at all. I'm very much in the interest of helping myself and my loved ones and anybody I can find that line between what are the necessary precautions we need to be taking and not. I want to make reasoned, valued choices, not fear-driven ones. So action step number 1 is try to focus on the facts of the situation as best you can.
And I mean, if you give a really concrete example, I think that's amazing as a first action step because you can think about a really concrete example here of, okay, one fact is we know that this virus is in the United States. We know that. Another fact is whatever state you're in or geographic area, you can go on the World Health Organization or the CDC website and you can see how many cases are in your area. That's also a set of facts that you can get. Mm-hmm. What our minds tend to do then, and as you mentioned, is start to place interpretations and forecasting on that. Well, if there's this many in my area, that must mean that my family's going to get it. And if my mom gets it, then she has this lung thing. And oh my God, this is so bad. Like you can see where you're starting to take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps forward that are no longer facts that we're working with. They are projections. Now, to your point, we all have to take into account our own risk factors. Those are also facts. It might be a fact that you have a loved one who is over the age of 80 with a particular condition that makes them vulnerable if they get this virus. That means that there's a set of precautions we need to take. But there's a difference between saying one fact is that I have a grandmother who has a condition that makes her vulnerable, so we're going to do these things. Another step, though, from that is to allow yourself to fuse too tightly to the thought patterns that you're having and go down a rabbit hole of guessing and supposing and wondering whether something's going to happen and what will happen next and what will happen next.
Right.
It's an accurate risk appraisal to the extent that you can, and then just know that you've done the right thing from there. Right. And I don't know where this is going to fit in, because I know the direction we're going to go. And so many of these are really, actually, you know what? I'm going to throw that in when we get to step 3, because I think it fits more there. I love step 1. So step 1 is hone the facts, really focus on those, and start to understand the difference between a fact and an interpretation or a prediction or a forecast.
Right. Well, and with that too, I think sometimes, because where people can argue is, well, I don't know that for sure through my direct sensory experience that there are 2 cases in Missouri. Now, the fact is, I read that from a credible source online. So that's where, like, in the face of uncertainty, I have to trust a little bit, right? I get to choose where I'm going to place my trust. And that brings us to, I think, a discussion about relying on other people for facts, right? And the media and what we're doing there. And I think, oh man, what happens a lot of times, and there are biases that come in our own internal selves, like in our brains and in our minds, as well as, we could have a huge discussion about media and things like that. But a couple things to keep in mind are the illusion of truth effect. So our minds, powerful as they are, as we like to say, are not sophisticated. And our minds will take repetition as an indication of truth. And what I mean by that is, if we are hearing and reading the same thing repeatedly, even if it's not credible in any way, it gets taken in and it starts to be treated as a fact.
Agreed. So can I actually jump off of there too?
Absolutely.
There's another piece, another effect that parlays right off of that. Even if you do have something that is true, there are X number of cases in my geographic area right now. The more you hear that over and over, the more salient or repetitive or easily brought to mind something is, the larger of a problem your mind will assume that it is. Yeah. Wow, if this is really easy for me to recall or bring it to mind, this must be something really big, when it's not. The reason why it feels like it is such an imminent threat is because it's been repeated, because you're seeing it over and over on Facebook, the news, from conversations that you're having.
Exactly. That is such a great point. And the thing is, when we keep in mind, we live in an era in which information is readily available 24/7. Everybody is competing for our attention. More extreme and alarmist things will get our attention, right? So media outlets and writers and bloggers and posters online are rewarded for clicks. So they might tend to sensationalize things. And again, I'm not saying that this is blown out of proportion in any way. I'm well aware of the fact that I'm going through my own sifting through information. But I do think it's important to do a couple things. And one is, make sure that the input you are taking in is credible. So think about it like a diet. If all you're eating is junk food, then it's just junk coursing through your body. If all you're taking in through your mind is junk, that's what's there. So make sure you're getting credible sources. And the other piece is limit it, for that reason that you were just saying, April. So from an anxiety standpoint, when we worry, we want certainty, right? Uncertainty equals anxiety for most people. Now, the issue is, most of the time we just assume we have certainty, even if it's not there. But it is very, very natural to seek certainty. And that's why so many people are finding themselves online, taking in more news, more information than they might normally. And as we have the social distancing and plans being canceled, people are bored. So what do? They go online and they are being bombarded with these messages. So I think it is really, really important to limit how often you're checking the news and social media, and to cull your feed to make sure it's credible sources.
Absolutely. And that actually gets into something that I was going to say before, and it actually works really nicely right here. Sometimes it can feel, when we're feeling really nervous or when we're worried about something, it can almost feel like, well, but wait, and I know I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to say, this is me, like this is my gut instinct a lot of the time. And I have to work really hard on this one. So if this is something you're working hard on, know that I'm like over here doing it with you. It can feel like, okay, I've checked CDC, I know where my geographic area is. And trust me, I'm doing this right now. My husband is an ER physician. So he goes back into a shift on Tuesday. I want to know how prevalent it is in my area and what's the likelihood that he's going to come face to face with a case when he's in that shift. So there are concerns that I have definitely for my family. But once I've looked at the CDC stats and I know I'm up to date and I understand where we're at as of right now, it can be incredibly hard to shut it down and stop looking, because that somehow feels in our minds sometimes as though, well, now I'm not taking it seriously. I don't have my eye on the ball, and holy cow, something could happen and I'm not paying attention. That must be, I'm not taking this seriously. I'm not doing what I need to do. There's only so much information that you need. And beyond that, all you're doing is just feeding the beast, the beast being that part of your mind that is like desperately like grasping at straws for anything. And that's not the part of your mind that you want to be feeding. You want to be feeding the deliberative, thoughtful, rational side of your mind in times like these.
Well, and with that too, what I'm also hearing a lot about are worries not about the health side, but the financial side. So when I think about it, like if we go with the fact, okay, the fact is stock market tanked, right? When I look at my numbers for some investments, they're down. The other facts are that historically, the data show that the market has recovered. Now, I'm not giving anybody financial advice, just saying, let's go with the facts. And here's the thing, people continue to check, and they're worried as they're seeing their 401ks go down. Or for people who, it's not necessarily about investments, it's what are the implications of the social distancing and what is this going to do? Sometimes, the more we check, the more, like you said, April, we're just feeding that beast. We're feeding that worry. And it's that I want to know, but it's not knowable. And that's something that people really need to pay attention to. And I always tell folks, when I'm working with them, when it comes to uncertainty, you need to, before you go looking for that information or trying to find certainty, you need to ask yourself, is this knowable? Like, we don't know how many people are going to end up contracting the coronavirus. That's not knowable right now. We're guessing. So is it knowable by me? There are people out there who know more than I do, but is it knowable by me right now? And if the answer to any one of those is no, we don't check. Stop seeking certainty. This is where you got to practice your other skills of sitting in the not knowing. Embrace the I feel uncertain and I feel uneasy, I feel scared or irritated or whatever it is that's coming up. But if it's not knowable by me right now, checking will only increase fear.
Absolutely agree. And there's some interesting things that we've talked about on prior episodes around being able to help yourself deal with that uncertainty, around pointing at the thoughts and feelings that you're having and just labeling them. Hey, I'm noticing. So putting yourself in the position of being the perceiver of your own thoughts and feelings. I'm noticing that I'm feeling really worried right now about my 401k. It's not, I'm freaking out. I'm like, don't go down that rabbit hole with it. Right. I'm noticing that I'm worrying about my 401k right now. That's something that's happening. It's a thing that's happening to you. It doesn't have to be you. Right. And there's another piece of this too, where a lot of times I totally agree. We just, in general, a great life skill and a great psychological strength pillar is building the ability to sit with discomfort without having to avoid it or look away or whatever, like being able to sit with that discomfort. Another piece, though, is there are other things in your life that you can do in order to help yourself, I would say, cope. So there are certain things around, let's say your kids have to be home from school or you are working from home instead of being at the office. There are major disruptions in the pattern that you're used to having in your day and in your week. And that alone is very disruptive psychologically and just everything else for people. But what you can control is still retaining something that resembles a schedule throughout your day so that you do have, no one's asking you to be perfect here. No one's asking you to be superhuman. There are things that you can do to retain just a little bit of structure in your day. And it's amazing how much that little bit can really help you just sort of soften the edges or just ease it a little bit so that you can sit with the discomfort of everything else that's going on. So not everything has to be uncomfortable. You can do a few things to help yourself through it, but just know that some of it, there is just not a thing that you can do about it. And we just need to cultivate that ability to just sit with it.
Yeah. And I think in terms of building on that, I'm a huge believer that building your emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize your emotions and respond to them and to hold them and have them, and it is incredible. But you're also making me think about control. And that, I think, is what really bothers people about uncertainty, is we feel a loss of control. I think we just need to get really clear about what we can and can't control. And April, to your point of maintaining structure and routine, that's something I can control. Who I want to be and how I want to be in the face of the uncertainty, that's something I can control. I can live my values and just take steps that's important or that are important to me. It also makes me think too of, all right, well, when it comes to taking steps and precautions and what do we need to do? And, there's a lot of information and evidence out there that suggests things are different right now. Bad things are happening. When you have governments ranging from cities to states to nationwide around the world declaring states of emergency, there's information coming in that's saying, hey, something's going on here. It is not realistic to just, in air quotes here, don't worry about it or carry on like usual. We can't even carry on like usual if your kids' schools are closed or you're working remotely now. So there's I'm a big fan of here are your filters to use. Here are the 3 questions to use to help tease apart, what is a productive worry, as in this is a real worry that I need to solve, that I need to do something with, versus this is an excessive worry. This is just my anxiety kind of running away with it. And I use the things, a couple questions. Is this a real problem? As opposed to an imagined one or a hypothetical one. So is this an actual problem that is happening versus a possible one that could happen? Now, this is to help kind of rein in that tendency for our minds to catastrophize, to jump from point A to point Z. Makes me think of the little kids who worry, who are, oh my gosh, I forgot my pencil in school. And then what if I can't take notes, and then I can't study, and then I do bad on the test, and then I fail out of school, and I can't get into college, and then I can't get a job, and I end up homeless on the streets. Now, if you were homeless on the streets, that's an actual problem. But for this child who forgot their pencil, it's a hypothetical. So, right. So if we're looking at point A to point Z, I'm not saying it's off the wall, it could never happen. Just, is it an actual problem or a possible one?
Well, and to put that in the context of what we're experiencing right now, to your point, there is evidence that something is happening, right? Yeah. So what you're saying is what is the most basic problem that's happening today? We are experiencing this pandemic of the coronavirus, right? That is a thing that we can absolutely state that is happening, but taking it 10 steps from there, and that means me and my entire family will be, wiped from the face of the earth. That is many steps further than what we're dealing with right at this moment. So if you can break it down to what is the basics of what's happening right now, that really can help you right size what you need to be concerned about. And no one's saying there's not anything to be concerned about. Concern is absolutely valid and rational in this
Right.
situation. But what we want you to be able to do, and this is so much of the aspect of psychological strength, it's not about pretending nothing's wrong. It's not
No.
about putting on rose-colored glasses. It's about having a more deliberative, realistic appraisal of
Right.
what your situation is, so that no one is going down this panic spiral.
Right.
Because what doesn't help, what never helps, is panic. Even if someone in your family, so I'll say my own grandmother who's in her 80s, even if my grandmother who's in her 80s did happen to contract the coronavirus, she's very vulnerable. Were that to happen, what will not help her situation is me panicking. Like, there's no part of that me panicking will help. Will I be upset? Absolutely. Will I be worried for her? Absolutely. But going beyond that, it's not actually going to change her situation at all.
Yeah. Well, and you're getting at, I think, part of psychological strength is mindfulness, right? And when we put that in context here, that's being present and taking things in as they are, right? So even when bad things are happening, which it's being able to say, okay, what is actually happening here? So we don't want to be overly positive. Woohoo, I love this. We don't want to be alarmist and panic driven, but to be able to take things in, that's back to that step number one, focus on the facts, right? And use those facts to then determine your course of action, which brings us back to like step number 3, I was talking is this an actual problem for today that I can control? So that I like to use those questions to help me right size, like you said, the worry, to choose a reasoned course of action. Do I need to take precautions here? I mean, I'll be honest, I'm washing my hands more often than I typically do as someone who specializes in OCD and often helps people face fears. I am looking to organizations like the CDC and the WHO for some guidance on what precautions to take. I'll be wiping down my office on a daily basis with cleaning supplies, which is not something I typically do. But I'm still planning to go to my office based on the information I have in my area at this point. Now, I don't know about in 3 weeks. No one does. I don't know about a year from now. No one does. So when I'm focusing on making my decisions and my action plans, what are the real problems for today that I can control? And that's what I focus on. And if they're not, then when it comes to just dealing with that excessive worry, we're back to those other skills that we've been touching on, like maintaining routine, acting in line with my values, practicing mindfulness, taking that observer perspective. My mind is telling me this, embracing emotions. So all of those elements of psychological strength and continuing to work on those despite what's going on around me.
Absolutely. And something that I want to stress for people too is that what you're doing in this situation is not unlike what we would ask anybody to do in any situation that's causing worry and anxiety, whether it is job stress, something in a relationship, just in general, life is really busy and hectic and difficult right now. All of these things that we're asking you to think about and these tools and just tips that we're giving you are really basic tips that can help you reason through a problem. And we're giving them to you in this sort of step-by-step, like, is this a real problem? Is this a problem today? Is this a problem I can control? Because sometimes having a very step-by-step framework, especially in the beginning when you're learning a skill, which that's absolutely what this is, you need that checklist. You need that step-by-step thing. After a while, this will become, and that's the goal of this, right? This will become more automatic. This will become the way you handle stress and the way you deal with worry is you go into a more deliberative mindset. Okay, wait, is this a problem? Is this a problem right now? Is this something I can control? So the things that we're asking you to do now are very similar to what we would ask you to do if you came to the Peak Mind Center outside of the situation that we're in. These are, and came to us with any other difficult thing that you were working with. These are the same tools and techniques and basic strategies that you can use to get your mind to just balance itself out. Let's not panic. Let's not go completely to that reptilian part of our mind and let that take over entirely. No, we have a deliberative part of our mind that we can use, that we can engage. No one's saying don't be worried, but don't be excessively so. What's the right, rational, realistic situation that's happening right now? And now let me think about my part in it and how I feel about it. It's a much more deliberative, thoughtful approach to the situation that we're in than where your mind will naturally allow itself to go if you don't intervene.
I love that you just made that point, because you're absolutely right. I see it as, we're using the current health situation to illustrate these. But when I think about like my own experience with adversity, so on a much smaller scale, you're right. It's the same process. It's the same tools, the same strengths and skills that help me move through those things. And I know for you as well. So that's a fantastic point to be making.
Amazing. Any last things that we want to say before we wrap things up today? I know we've got a couple of resources about, dealing with coronavirus and anxiety that we can link up in the episode description. So if you're listening to this on your phone, you should be able to just scroll down and you'll get links to those resources. Also links to other episodes of the podcast where we have tackled topics like anxiety that might be helpful for you in, this perspective. Sometimes hearing about it from a different context can be really helpful. But anything else that we want to cover before we wrap things up today, Ashley?
I think that sounds good. The only other thing that kind of goes through my mind, and it's actually comes from a previous guest that you had on the Building Psychological Strength podcast, and it's a colleague of mine in the anxiety world, Dr. Karen Cassidy. So she specialized in anxiety and OCD forever. But she had written guidelines for people with OCD dealing with this time. But the piece that stands out is that she said it's important to remember that this is a time of inconvenience, not a crisis. So we are taking all of these precautions to help the greater good, to help protect our communities and our healthcare system, to keep it from getting overwhelmed so that we can all get through this together. But I liked that, even just framing it as it's an inconvenience. It is something that we have to handle, but not necessarily a crisis. I think that helps kind of right-size worries too.
I love that. Well, I hope everyone listening, I hope you have taken away just a small nugget even from this episode. I mean, for the very least, I hope the easiest thing that we can always offer people is compassion, both toward themselves, in the fact that if you're having to work really hard to keep yourself from panicking, if you're feeling like, man, I want to, run out and do something, sort of rash, I'm feeling like I don't have control, and I see myself in some of these examples. Or if you're looking at your family members, compassion toward other people, family members, friends, other people that you might know, just understand that everybody is going through a very real feeling, sense of fear. Is it accurate? In a lot of cases, maybe, maybe not. But everyone's experience of fear is something that they are experiencing, and we're all handling it in a different way. So I'm hoping that what we've given you today in terms of some of these frameworks and questions that you can ask yourself will help you get through those moments when things are feeling really uncertain and they're feeling like they are more out of control than you would like them to be. Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
I think we're good.
All right. Thanks you guys so much for tuning into this episode. We hope it was helpful, and we will be back next week with a regular interview.